I appreciate, and I'm honored to give some thoughts tonight, and got the call last spring. And one of the things I think a lot about, because life is busy and complicated, what are our leverage points, really? You know, we can only do so many things, we can only follow through on so many things. And so sort of pose the idea, what's a big idea for this community? What would we throw out there? So it actually took me quite a while of stewing, lots of bike rides this summer to kind of come up with an idea. And let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. And I thought I'd start with this quote. It's something I've been mulling on for a couple years. Whatever matters to human beings, trust is the atmosphere in which it thrives. An ethicist, Sulela Bach. And you know, if there's maybe one take home I would give you, I'd encourage you to read this essay by David Brooks in The Atlantic, America's Having a Moral Convulsion in the Atlantic. And David essentially goes through, takes a historic perspective on the role of trust in communities. And you can see that trust is something that goes up and down. And so trust was something that we regained in the 1890s. There was sort of this huge outgrowth of building of institutions, Boy Scouts, Forest Service. A lot of those institutions emerged then. So taking this historic perspective, you can rightfully argue that we're at a low point in trust. And what I'm going to sort of argue, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly today, is when I thought through a lot of these ideas, I ended up on, I want to try to convince you at the end of this talk that housing for nonprofits is probably going to be one of the most effective things that determines what our community looks like in 25 to 50 years. And I'm going to sort of ground this argument in what it means to build social capital and trust. I started, as pointed out in my introduction, I started working on ants. And so I say I've moved from being a sort of a research biologist to a practitioner. I have to figure out how to get people to cooperate. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. But I'm going to give a couple quick definitions. Social capital, right? So social capital is our network of relationships, our social norms, it's the number of connections, it's the quality and diversity of those relationships. Trust is something that's the quality of the relationship. And then the second idea that I'll introduce is resilience. And resilience, and I'm thinking about resilience as something that's a community aspect. It's our ability to plan, absorb, recover, adapt to adverse events, make hard decisions. And I didn't know that Jenny Reynolds would be here, but really in some ways I should dedicate this talk to Joni. You know, fire and COVID, the pandemic, are several examples of where our community is tested and are we resilient to those events. And our ability to be resilient in large measure goes back to the social capital and the trust that we have. So why does social capital matter? There's a lot of great research, and you didn't come to see a science talk, but I could give you one on ants that you really don't want to see. But you know, the evidence is that community resilience, mortality, crime, child welfare, happiness, all of these things that we care about tie back to social capital. And probably one of the more interesting things when you dive into this literature is if we think about happiness, well, money. What's the relationship between money and happiness? The relationship is you get a little more, you're a little bit happier, but it asymptotes. But what's interesting is you're unhappy if someone else gets money, right? So there's a lot of great research that our happiness is often negatively affected by the perception that other people are wealthy and we're not, because we see wealth as a relative thing. Well, social capital is something that we all benefit from when everybody gets it. There's plenty of evidence that if I build relationships, I'm a happier person. And there's evidence that if you build relationships, I'm a happier person. And so putting the emphasis on social capital in our relationships is one of the many things, and maybe the most powerful thing, that we can do to build happiness. Mortality, what's the most powerful way to cut the chance of you dying in the next year? If you join one group in the next year, you'll cut your chance of dying by 50%. Pretty amazing stuff. So what does that mean? What does building social capital look like? And I'm going to go through the talk pretty quickly. So I'm really just trying to sketch out arguments. I'm not trying to go too deep because it's 10 minutes. So on an individual level, I would say it's to engage constructively and with positive intentionality. And what do I mean by intentionality? What I mean is if you're engaging, ask yourself, am I engaging for ego? Or am I engaging because I'm actually trying to make my community a better place? if I'm going to stand up in front of a group and make a comment, am I doing that to please myself, or am I doing that because the group has something that they might take to improve? And so engagement is important. It needs to be constructive, and it needs to be with intentionality. And I think that's something that often we don't ask ourselves, are we constructively engaging? So that's just the individual level. Join. This is an old photo of the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, 1929. I thinkGunnison's first nonprofit, maybe by 30 years or so. I can personally attest that I would not be anything close to what I am in terms of happiness and personal satisfaction without having joined RMBL 35 years ago. And we all have organizations like that we can join, and that's often where we build social capital. And it doesn't necessarily really matter what organization you join. It just matters that you join, and that you join something that you're passionate about, and you use that as the basis for building trust and building relationships. So first, engage. Second, joining is essentially a way of committing long-term to a group of individuals and building those relationships. There are different kinds of social networks. So we talk about bonds. So bonding social networks or social capital are the relationship we build with our friends. It's incredibly important and valuable that you take that walk with your friend, that you spend the time with your mother or your child, and you build those bonds. But we also have bridging social capital, and we have linking social capital. And bridging social capital is how we connect to distant friends, and linkages. This is when we have people that are sort of moving across socioeconomic lines. And when we talk about community resilience, a lot of what is driving that is this bridging and linking social capital. So I wanted to highlight SIMBA. And I'll highlight SIMBA not because it's like the organization you're going to go to if you want to do everything you can, to improve health and human welfare, but I love mountain biking. So if I get out 4 or 5 times a week, it's a wonderful week, no matter what else is going on. And so it's something I've been involved on the periphery. But what I love about SIMBA, as an example of a nonprofit, is they have volunteer days. And those volunteer days, they bring people together from 20-year-olds to 60-year-olds, second homeowners to residents, to build trails. And that's bridging and linking capital. Okay. So, final slide. I have 3 minutes, so I'm not doing too bad. So the two sort of last ideas that I'll live with, and I've been thinking about this in the context of Rumble. So for nonprofits, are we thinking of implementing opportunities for diverse engagement? So not just on philanthropy, fundraising, which is often the focus of just paying the bills, but are we providing opportunities like SIMBA does to bring people together from different socioeconomic groups, different age classes, because that's really building social capital. And there are lots of ways that happens. This event tonight is one of those ways of doing that. But I would challenge every nonprofit to think about, are you doing things that create linking and bonding, or sort of linking and bridging social capital? And then the final idea I'm going to throw out is housing. So why nonprofit housing? So for me, I think nonprofits in the long run, in 25 and 50 years, I think will be the main entities where we create this kind of linking and bridging social capital. Schools are a great place. When your kids go, you get to learn, the parents of your kids' friends, and it's a great way to cross social networks. But nonprofits, I believe, in Gunnison County are one of the main ways that we build social capital. And housing is going to be critical to the health of our nonprofits in 25, 50 years. And so if I were to think of one leverage point, what that one leverage point would be housing that targets nonprofits, that gives them the resources they need to go out and help our community build social capital. And when I was spending some time looking into this research, there was an interesting report on the National Academy of Sciences, and they were looking at how do communities recover from disasters, right? Fire, flooding, and the highest ROI was in building social capital. So we can harden our infrastructure, but at the end of the day, no matter what we do with our infrastructure, something is going to come up that we can't anticipate, and it'll be our relationships and the trust that we have with each other that will determine how our community responds. And so if I would say there's one lever point that we could do to kind of give our kids and grandkids an opportunity to enjoy Gunnison County the way we have. It's to ensure that we have multiple ways to create social capital here in Gunnison County. And I would say the simplest is let's really continue to encourage nonprofits to drive that social capital and give them the tools. And I think housing sits at the center of that. So thank you for coming tonight.